Hi, everyone. I'm Jessica Meza-Torres with Literary Arts. Thank you all for joining us tonight. I'm excited to be here with the 5 finalists for the Stafford Hall Award for Poetry. The Oregon Book Awards honor some of the finest writing by Oregon authors. This year, there are 35 finalists in 7 genres, and the winners will be announced on OPB Radio on May 2nd at 7 p.m. on a special Oregon Book Awards episode of the Archive Project. The mission of Literary Arts is to engage readers, support writers, and inspire the next generation with great literature. You can hear more about Literary Arts and all the Oregon Book Awards on our website at www.literary-arts.org. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge that Literary Arts is based in Portland, Oregon, and that we are currently an unceded land. The Maloma, Cathlamet, Clackamas, Tumwater, Walala bands in the Tualatin Kalapuya, and many other indigenous nations of the Columbia River occupied and operated on this land long before Western colonizers arrived, and many continue to do so today. Despite attempts of removal and erasure, these communities remain a strong and vital part of our future. Literary Arts recognizes that this acknowledgement is only a small step in affirming the ongoing presence and contributions of our Native communities, and we can commit to engaging to these communities more fully as we fulfill our mission. Now, I would like you all to join me in welcoming our first reader of the night, Anne Elkins. Anne Elkins earned a BA in Art and English and an MFA in Poetry and a Fulbright Fellowship to write art-inspired poetry. She has written, painted, and taught on 6 continents, exhibiting many paintings and publishing several books along the way. She's a finalist this year for Hope on Stones, and she lives in Rogue River. Hi, Anne.
Hello, such a pleasure to be here. Can you hear me? Just making sure I'm on. Okay, wonderful. My book, Hope of Stones, was inspired by a 16th century Spanish nun and an 18th century French architect. Saint Teresa of Avila and Charles Axel Guillemot never met, but they each built and left behind a largely invisible legacy. Hers was a vision of the interior castle within us, and his was to save Paris from collapsing back into the quarries that had been excavated to build it. And today you can read what the nun built with her words, and you can visit a fraction of what the architect built up beneath Paris. And in my book, Hope of Stones, you can read what the poet, me, builds between them. I think of the poems as a kind of cross-century conversation among the nun, the architect, and the poet. And there are motifs of fire and plums throughout. I'm going to read a poem from each of the voices, and just a little visual detail, all of the nun's voice poems appear in the upper right-hand corner, the architect's in the lower left, and then the poet's in the middle as a kind of bridge between them. So I'm going to start with a poem in the nun's voice. It's called The Nun's Castle. And Saint Teresa founded the Barefoot Carmelite order. She wanted to return to a simplicity of the Catholic faith. And this poem imagines her imagining what she might say to a young novitiate entering the order. And it probably helps to know that Teresa's most enduring work was The Interior Castle, a book that talks about the 7 dwellings of the spirit within us. So The Nun's Castle. Imagine yourself as a castle. See here, the library of longing. So stacked with fulfilled love, you need a ladder to reach hope. And here, the open windows of vision, infinity mirrors, bending you to distant bliss. Feel the woven carpet beneath your feet. No low magic, it lifts you to beauty. Step into the garden and fill with fountain sound. Remember splendor and how you are its ever dwelling. Everything here is a metaphor for heaven. You can spend the rest of your life entering and entering and entering in. The second poem is in the voice of the architect, so it's in the lower left-hand corner. And the day that the architect began his job as inspector of quarries, He was driving to work essentially in a cart, and an entire section of Rue d'Enfer, or Hell Street, simply collapsed in a sinkhole, as if to confirm that he was indeed needed to help save the city of Paris from collapsing. And this poem picks up after he's begun trying to pillar the rubble beneath and save the city. And it's called The Architect Disbelieves. There is no weather down here. It's old and warm always. The lantern light soaks into stone, the underworld eating it whole. Every day I descend into this second city to save the one built above it, the heaving and hefting. We turn cloches of fallen rubble into stalagmites of stonework. One worker said, it's as if we're building a cathedral upside down. For each right side up cathedral on the surface, we mark its spot here below with a fleur-de-lis. We match the tunnels to the streets above and give them the same names. We leave the spaces beneath houses to their owners, who own their bit of Paris to the center of the earth. If they wished, they could dig cellars to hell. Priests talk about the end of time, how all this will burn. I can't say why, but I do not believe them. Meanwhile, people gather in daylight, in stained glass masses of stones and hope. And then I'll read just two more poems in the poet's voice, one engaging with the nun and one with the architect. And this first one engages with the nun's book, The Interior Castle, and the first part of each stanza that blends and sort of links into a line from one of each of her books, the 7 books that make up The Interior Castle. And I think when you listen, it's almost more fun to not know where the quotes begin and end. So this is called The Poet Enters the Nun's Castle. 1. The plums ripened while I was beseeching the beloved. 2. I pulled them from the tree, asking it to give us understanding of the magnitude. 3. The tree answered when I bit into its stone fruit, we are already blessed. 4. Gathering, pitting, cutting, baking into cobblers for friends. Remember, the important thing is not to think much, but to love much. 5. What is the hope of every plum and person? Perfect union. 6. When I was 6, I tried to dye the green plums purple. I wish I could say more about this, but it is ineffable. 7. After the ripening, the first frost. After the frost, the freezer full of plums. I confess that I am deeply confused. And the last poem is engaging with the architect, and during the restoration process, he wrote many pamphlets. And so this poem, kind of the reverse of the last, starts with a fragment of one of his pamphlets and then blends into my words. And I love that the ending image echoes the front of the book, which probably is very hard to see digitally, but it's a manhole cover shedding light into a quarry. And big gratitude to my publishers, Press 53, for finding that image and for this making this book happen. So the last poem I'll read is The Poet Enters the Architect's Catacombs. At a depth of 12 to 13 fathoms, it's core quiet down here. Pieces of stone lifted by hand now lift the earth up from within herself, held with mortar of bones. The memory of excavations is almost fragrant. The ceiling above me once collapsed into a tumble of voussoirs, no single keystone to speak of. And this without making anyone the least bit nervous, though I move away fast. Bodies know much more must and can be done to remedy all the damages here, everywhere. Did you know, in the void of the quarry, smoke can linger for hours? One can suspend the scent of perfume too. This distracts me from the fear of being crushed alive or crushed to death. It had to be resolved, this descent, one stair at a time, one corridor after another, and a final glimpse up a shaft to see the pinhole light of sky shining through a manhole cover too far above. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. That was great. Before I introduce our next reader, I just want to remind everyone that we will have some time at the end for questions. So if anything pops into your mind and you want to ask, go ahead and submit those at the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. Our next reader is Iman Hassan. Iman's debut poetry collection, RAGHEAD, was editor's pick in the 2018 New Issues Poetry Prize. She earned a PhD in poetry from the University of Nebraska and an MFA in poetry from Arizona State University. Hi.
Thank you, Jessica. Hi, everyone. I'm excited to be here tonight. And before I start, I want to give a special thank you to the editors at New Issues Poetry and Prose, especially to Kim Colby. Not only is she a sublime editor, she's a wonderful poet herself. And without her careful eyes, probably wouldn't have been a find of a collection as it turned out. I have a few poems to share with you tonight, but I think I want to say that to a certain extent, sometimes poetry can be prophecy. And I think all poets understand what I mean by that. And the poem of the book I wrote in the summer of 2016, right before the great political upheaval we experienced and all these climate change fires and whatnot. So on that note, I'll continue with the reading. The poem is called Rome is Burning. I can't blame Nero for playing the fiddle while watching his city fireball. Sure, there was blood on his hands, turned powerless now, except for churning out tunes like a devil dancing on a hot-oiled griddle. It's not like everyone can hear the frantic chirps of crickets. We crank up our music at safe distances from one another, take refuge in front of a Blu-ray mesmer. I mean, isn't this the stigmata of what we do? All hail to purchase power, to lifelines of credit. All hail to the power of fire. So play, Nero, play that fiddle. Let's break out some boom chicka pop and watch the world go poof. My next poem is the title poem of my collection, and it's called RAGHEAD. And I think the impetus behind this poem is to really take something, a derogatory term, and transform it into something more human. And I think that was the main logic or drive, if you will, as I wrote this poem. So, RAGHEAD. It was more than penis envy, more than ancestral calling of desert warriors who understood the power those filmy layers had to survive the sun's overwhelming. But oh man, the tactile allure of phyllo fabric between fingers still thrills me. Castration complex, straight up sexual attraction, no matter. But I used to don my father's headgear, preen in his bedroom mirror. How handsome. My pulse pounding in Bedouin drumbeat fashion, afraid to wrinkle its starched goodness or be found in its gauzy tabernacle, admiring how white material flanked my profile like holy sideburns, stiff wings halo-like, delicate when left hanging. I was outrageous in my faux drag, feeling like a deckhand struggling to master the art of a sail flip over a shoulder. Just a curious teenager, bored over summer break, desirous of my first Dishdasha experience, a lip-syncing Boy George, Karma Karma Chameleon, or pretending I was a nun in habit, wagging a finger at my reflection in bouts of midsummer nights imagining, get thee to a nunnery. No matter my precaution, my father finally caught a show of my shenanigans, zeal of his pleasure at my make-believe surreal, as he taught me to fold the cloth, tease its front into a dent under an anchoring rope of kahfiya. He dressed me up in a dishdasha and we went for a ride. He even let me drive the whole stretch of Gulf Road, agreeing my name for the night was Ibrahim al-Majnoon. And crazy we were, with my eyelinered unibrow, penciled mustache, and him still loud and lively, pretending the son I was the son he didn't have. Al-Qatra, to me, you're everything but a rag. This next poem is entitled, I've Come Back from My Clothes, and I wrote this after my first visit to Notre Dame. On an interesting note, Notre Dame means for her lady, and that lady is Isis. And if you think of the name of Paris, it's Par Isis, for Isis. So that's actually where the name of Paris came from. I've come back from my clothes. Those tattered rags in a glass case belonging to a nameless saint are mine. Those cherubs in ceiling corners looking down at us are real. If I stood behind the pulpit and prayed out loud while looking up into the palm of a stained glass dome, who's to say I haven't stood here before, even before these marble floors were grouted and laid? We learn about dying from the dead in the form of a chain, of one long chain, outside the circle of linear minds. We all once knew the secret handshake, the firm grip of hands outside of time. So tell me, dear Cynthia, who's to say these clothes aren't mine? My next poem is entitled To All People. To the scientists, can we ever heal this plasticized water? To my mother, I already mourn your not yet death. To Mother Earth, I say, my light was once as big as you are big, not a shriveled plum skulking behind its breastplate, pumping out the spotty aura, deplete as the ozone. To ET, yes please, phone home. Take me along with s'il vous plaît. The empire is striking hard, my words fallen angels without halos, my lightsaber now just a glow stick, stuck in the back corner of a drawer, left over from the 90s. To my Generation X, did you forget what the X even stood for? We were the ones who invented the rave and raved, gave Big Corpse the finger, danced ecstatically under full moons. We raged until the sun climbed over a lip of earth. Those were right days. We were grateful for the radiant blessings of music behind our force field of youth. To all people, don't you remember the pre-spinning of words like natural and free range, when our biggest concern was lard and Oreos and a pre-Splenda, pre-saturated non-GMO era? Better I hurry back into my mother. Better my mother hurry back into her earth womb than stand witness to all this and all this. And I'll end with a short, my latest poem called Coyote Run. This is not in the collection, but I thought to share it. Another night and they are back, oilating through long limbs of dark, yippee-yaying and yodeling as the night grew. This was their jam, wild ukulele sonatas, impervious to us. As the pack let loose, howls stirring the pitch black shadows as the whole caravan came out for a cruise, catching scent of deer, while wild cherry trees held squirrels holding their breath when that tribe moved in self-proclamation. Now, lights of houses across the valley are like eyes blinking open where they shouldn't be, making nights less and less dark. I lean against my window, mad desire to join them seizing me. It is all I can do to stop from flinging the back door open, running out to join them with my furious lust for life, for doing the doing of living I'd forgotten how to do this past year between the pandemic and a pandemic making of new housing developments gradually enveloping. But I rein myself in, let the fever passed as the last of their fierce serenades lingered. Smoke on the rain, touching the many glass panes other faces peered out of, wide awake now. For a moment, everyone recalling the wild drumbeat of their tamed hearts. Thank you.
Thank you, Iman. That was beautiful. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I'm Susan with Literary Arts, and I'm really happy to be here with you tonight. I'm going to introduce our next poet. It's Floyd Skloot. Floyd Skloot is a creative nonfiction writer, poet, and fiction writer whose work has won 3 Pushcart Prizes, the Penn USA Literary Award, 2 Pacific Northwest Book Awards, and 2 Oregon Book Awards. And he's a finalist this year for Far West, his 9th book of poetry. So please join me in welcoming Floyd. Welcome, Floyd.
Thank you, Susan.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. Good to be back with you with the Oregon Literary Arts. This is a poem entitled The Lost Name. One day this fall, I could not remember the name of the island in Hawaii where we'd spent a week in December. There was a wall around the word. I closed my eyes. Then I thought of the red-crested cardinal who kept returning to our lanai, the yellow tang ablaze in the reef as sunlight swept through a quick break of cloud, the sprawling banyan tree near Lahaina Harbor. Names everywhere in my brain, nerve cells sparkling with names. Crimson Opakapaka came to mind, Haleakala, Snorkel Bobs, but not the island, not the sound of it, not even the first letter. If I let go, thought of something else, looked around, it might come to me. I knew I could open Rand McNally, check online, ask my wife. Green turtles and breaching humpback whales, cattle egret glimpsed in the blink of an eye. This poem is called Peacock at Tule Springs. Tule Springs is just outside Las Vegas. And it's one of those moments that unleashes a memory. In this case, a memory from when my daughter Rebecca was a child. Peacock at Tule Springs. In the late autumn dust and constant wail of 2 seed-scattering tractors, I thought the bolt of blue before me on the trail was a broken bottle until I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. I thought it might be blowing leaves till it rose and slowly unfolded in waves of sudden color as the cloudy sky cleared. His tail became a curtain parting, and I saw my daughter beside me at dusk in a South Carolina park 40 years ago. She was laughing, certain the peacock calling from the dark edge of the woods knew he didn't have to hide from her. She held my hand as he emerged into what was left of the day's light. I could hear and feel how her breath surged, and she whispered, "I knew I was right." This next poem is called Life Bird. And it recounts an episode that took place in Wadsworth Wetlands, Lake County, Illinois. My wife and I were in Chicago at the time. And as with all birders, she was following online the sightings of certain birds, and a rare bird had been sighted, I think it was about 50 miles away. And so we did what birders do. We got in the car and went to find it. Life bird. Two old men at the far edge of the marsh look back at us through binoculars as we look at them through binoculars. Blurred a few yards behind, a third person turns into a rolling luggage rack rigged with camera gear as I bring him into focus. We have all come in search of the same furtive little bird seen here earlier this morning, a least bittern walking on lily leaves in the thick August light. Word went out online and we have driven 50 miles to add the least to my wife's life list. As the men begin to scan the shore, we hear a harsh and raspy whack, whack, whack. That means the bird is nearby. All we can see in the still water are reeds and bunched leaves from the place we heard the call. But the men, crouched together, have seen something. We walk the arc of a narrow path toward them, keeping to the margins, keeping quiet. As one man sets up a tripod, the other whispers their welcome and leads my wife to a spongy knob of shoreline. He points, checks his watch, steps back, and she lifts her binoculars, breathing deeply to steady herself. The least bittern, his pale buff and white body nestled in the notch of a lily leaf, appears like a secret flower in bloom for just this moment. She lets her binoculars dangle and brings her camera up instead. The bird's golden eye watches her, and I imagine it can sense her hushed laughter of delight as an answering call. This next poem, Discoveries, is not in my book Far West. It was written since I finished the poems in that book. And since I was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. Discoveries. What I knew about Parkinson's disease was tremors, slurred speech, shuffling gait. I knew about Muhammad Ali and Michael J. Fox, my cousin Jerry in a wheelchair with his face a waxen mask of the face I remember. I knew nothing about these surges of anxiety brought on by nothing at all, or the way dreams could come to life in bed and transform me into a hissing panther on all fours, teeth bared, one paw lashing out at my wife. I never imagined myself stilled from the inside, stilled from the inside out, gut filling with waste, feet at once numb and afire, folding into themselves and losing their grip. And the last poem is called Coconut Patties. My grandparents were a box of coconut patties brought back from Miami in February, just for me. They were a tiny kitchen reeking of flanken and roasted root vegetables, a samovar of tea, rugelach from the bakery around the corner. His laugh was the roar of an airplane propeller, and hers was silent, but made her bounce. Always a short sachet to Central Park and back at dusk, followed by a game of gin rummy on the living room sofa, while traffic rattled the apartment's windows. When they spoke of the old country, Krakow, Tuchow, they spit 3 times over their shoulders to ward off the evil eye and kissed their fingertips.
Thank you, Floyd. That was beautiful. Thank you. Our next poet is Ed Skoog. Ed is the author of 4 books of poems, including Run the Red Lights, Rough Day, and Mr. Skylight, all published by Copper Canyon Press. And he's a finalist this year for Travelers Leaving for the City, also published by Copper Canyon. It's great to see you tonight, Ed. Looking forward to hearing you read. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. How's the audio? Is the audio okay? Seems to be.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, great. Thank you, Susan, and the Literary Arts and the judges for selecting this book, Travelers Leaving for the City, from Copper Canyon, the nominee for the book award this year. Of course, it's very strange over this last year that the book came out, and I mean, to look at it, it doesn't seem to even have existed. And so it's very nice to be able to read it for you tonight and to revisit it. There's a poem in it called Tarentum. Section 1. Then the mouse who ate the moon left the cheese, who was so alone. It made a movie about loneliness. It doesn't matter how reduced her fingernails were, bitten and chewed, how red the lipstick on the cover of her lap's movie magazine. The couple sold at the station, him high-haired and priest-eyed, and her in a blue scarf, laughing when he tripped on his broom. Oh, lost again on earth, in hallways where repeating doors never close my eyes. I am forever waking in sheets and in bare feet, feel my way along the wallpaper to the porcelain bath, the green soap, a curved story that brings me back to mattress. When I wake, stretch. My mother was born in Tarentum. Elephants invaded at Tarentum. Horace wrote about Tarentum. Ornate. The hotel we sloughed off when we missed the train and had to rouse the hotelier, whose key was chained, heavy to a dictionary, rode the elevator up, himself half asleep. I slept on floors in that property of vapors and liturgies. Cold outside, but the heater too high, up dazzling with murk. Encountering it, I miss the train over. I am trying to keep my appointment, but get lost on the vine in the giant's cloud. A vast pneumonia, of course. The vine wanted to grow there, to suspend between 2 fires a trembling thread, which, when struck, shudders with vision, tangled by what God, the wrong date on my calculator, the wrong frame around my self-portrait, while she traveled, her mind, along rooked streets. Section 2. I reach with you into Tarentum, where once nothing lived, an ambience, an ambiance, congealed Brussels sprouts rot in the calendar, asparagus rises early, late. Summer we smell the olive groves before we see them, a splendor that predates memory. Even in date groves, where palms in estrangement tower over us, we may feel the vegetable pull in each sense. You can live, if you wish, in Tarentum. Emails circulate throughout the company, reply all notions of meeting, promotion, the boss's emotion concentrated and casual. Some language misdirects, heads down the wrong broadcaster's breath. It's bread and button. Nothing ever goes wrong here. I can't believe. It's the hallway again, as one with a fever, but perhaps not a body. Yet wash the body with a song in the eyes, beach towel around the knees, daubing the undershoulder last. The water drains, draining the hour. I can't read. Repeat then. What are they going to make up, to explain? Tarentum is also called Toronto. I rise earlier than my hosts, set out exploratory for their neighborhood, but the block hath no endage. Section 3. Lion pale lawns set out for dummy, crocus, in a grave robbery walk, miles through early sunup, the residents still in night's pullover. It is as though I am not anywhere. The regressive wind through finger-bone branches. Although no tarantula lives near Toronto, the tarantella was first danced in Toronto to diffuse the poison. So if you're bitten around Toronto, no, it's where the family's from of Quentin Tarantino. If you know movies, if you duck into the movies last minute on cold weekends, on other walks, other times through sub-zero streets of, say, Mankato, Minnesota, a town I don't know. Even the bars I duck into are unfamiliar. As a kid in Topeka, when it was under the highway, across gravel to go over the Burlington Northern, slurred, coupled at night, the sound came into the houses of Greenwood and the houses of Woodlawn, sat down and ate onion soup. Mornings faster, afternoons you could climb up the ladder, over the handshake, and down to the river, the color of a banker's shoe. Always carrying a little life, a little death. But I also see the chain-link fence reflected in a puddle, other puddle reflections, places where puddles dry up, in stages, the cracks written there, the flakes, the traces. It is as though someone took a rock and smashed the back window of the moment, the way Donovan and I shot out the back window of a police car with a BB gun. What was I keeping there for later? Section 4. The butcher at Walter's grocery glories that he hasn't ever killed anything, only made cuts here and there, a dot of blood on his sienna mustache. I walk into new shoes. I head into the hotel again like a beautiful stranger coming down the street, carrying very little. Not to meet me. I saw a screening of Jackie Brown at Aurora Avenue in Seattle. We were a test audience. Tarantino was there in his long black coat. Was there. Some of you, already dead, have known more than the sash cord, which I know is tied behind the panel to significant weight in older homes. The cord becomes spectre thin and breaks. Few people know how easy it is to slip a screwdriver into the wood to open the side door. Slip the new cord through the tie like a fishhook. My cold, numb fingers try to knot on the shores of Duck Lake and the onrushing snow and seal it up like a mausoleum. But what has really been pawing at me, like a neglected companion, is the concealed heaviness behind simplest surfaces, how most of the time I have no idea how to begin repair. Because the rabbit is a filament in its bulb. Because the child has to hear 3 stories every morning. Because this poem, if you hold it up to the wind, he is a filament in bed, and I'm a rabbit in the field, long leg, constant nibbling, stupid, 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 outside the field. I'm not sure there is any meaning like what you catch in the window of an ambulance in transit, or a parking space interrupted by a tree. My grandfather wasn't blown away in Tarentum. Lion's forehead pressed into my sentence. What is better than books, I said. What of the structure of the hair, the suggestion roundness gives of the earth, Other says, there is another lion at my liver. Asks of us again, grandfather is a dead language called Tarentum. What yesterday showed itself as a snake, today arrives as a cloud. They take you in a bouquet of last year's Tarentums. Returned as a flower pot ache left, returned as a secret, then secrecy turned car around again. I have never been there. I'll never get out. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ed. Our last reader for tonight is Joe Wilkins. Joe is the author of a novel, Fall Back Down When I Die, and a memoir, The Mountain and the Fathers. He has published 4 poetry collections, including When We Were Birds, winner of the 2017 Oregon Book Award in Poetry, and he lives with his family in McMinnville. This year, he is a finalist for his work, titled Thieve.
Thanks, Jessica. And thanks to Literary Arts. Thanks to all the poets tonight. It's been such a strange, a strange year, right? And I've done so few readings, and it feels really lovely to be with you here now, and to have this chance to share some poems and to listen and be a part again of a writing community, as we've had to pull back from community. So thanks for being here, and everyone too listening in. Thanks. So I'm going to read a few poems from Thieve. I'm just going to go ahead and start with the first poem. It's called Come Along. A come along is a tool. We use it all the time to stretch wire on a barbed wire fence, but you can also use it to ratchet up something heavy, and that's the use it's put to in this particular poem. Come along. Sagging chain link, dirt yard studded with dog shit and weeds. That gutted 2-cycle on the front step. You know what I'm talking about. In the fence corner nearest the cottonwood, the dogs hunch, long muscles rippling beneath scabbed hides. Just out of reach, the rotting, undone body of a deer sways. Winched up with a come along way up, so the dogs or whoever can't get at it. When I go there with you now, I'm 20 feet tall. I reach over, thumb the paw, let the shame of that soft, black, fly-bitten carcass thunk down. Watch with a warm heart the dogs feast. But that day, no one was home. Screen door winging on its busted spring, the tool shed padlocked. I couldn't find a ladder. The tree half dead and nearly branchless, I tried scrabbling up anyway. Somehow tore my hand open, my palm, the very spot they'd bang a Jesus nail. As it was, my own dark blood welled up and spilled into my lifeline, ran that crease like some ancient river channel, islanding my thumb, blood thinning and falling as 2 ropes of China rose, pooling finally in the dust, where the dogs smelled it and went wild. So I'm going to read 2 poems. There's a central sequence in the book. Iman talked about writing just before the election of 2016. Many of these poems were written just after the election of 2016. And they're all titled Poem Against the Crumbling of the Republic, because just after that election as well, in the way of things these days where we're all digitally connected, I got an email from someone I hadn't talked to in 20 years. Someone I'd grown up with, and it was clear from the email that things weren't going especially well for him. And we exchanged, he emailed me, I emailed him back. He emailed me once more, offering just a little more, and I reached out again, and then I didn't hear anything, and I couldn't help but keep talking, and so the speaking went into these poems. So I'm going to read 2 of those poems. If I Could, a poem against the crumbling of the Republic. Old friend, I'm afraid you are lost. The streetlights sputtering, the night about hard and dark. I know you're tired. I know in the turning of your life, this is not where you thought you'd be. Jesus Christ, be careful. The door you see might well be a mouth, its rusty voice the lies hinge. I'd bring a flashlight and a sack of beef jerky sticks if I could. Maybe I can. Maybe if I reach out, my fingers might shape the bones of your face. Just anybody or poem against the crumbling of the Republic. Old friend, stuck in that small town, we tried every way we could to kill ourselves. That night down on the river, that night I lost you, that was a stupid night. I think about it all the time. We'd already sunk the front wheels of your 3-on-the-tree Impala in the cow shit and mud. Around the fire, I didn't know half the faces. You gnashed a palm full of pills. You took off your shirt. I didn't want to ride with just anybody. Old friend, where did you go? I circled the flames, banged on every back window. Later, swaying at the water's edge, I started tossing rocks, winging them hard. I was hoping in the dark I'd hit you. One of the other movements of the book, though, is looking backwards as well as forwards. And as a father of 2 young children, I find myself explaining things all the time and trying to explain things that are complicated that I don't even understand. And so I'm going to read a couple of poems, and they're both titled "Explain Something." So this is "Explain Recession." Dogwood, iris, tight green fig, empty house, early lights jig, pink rain-faded chalk on a mossy, buckled sidewalk. Someone, yes, used to live here. Not us, but someone called them dear. Not us, child. Not this year. Explain extinct. This has an epigraph from Thoreau. They're all beasts of burden in a sense, made to carry some portion of our thoughts. We could, if we wanted, follow the old buck down to the madrone grove. The high branches splitting now their ochre skins. See how below the boulder fall he slows, slips without sound through sword fern and thimbleberry, waits in deep creek shadow. He knows this is where they might meet, he and whoever will one day taste him. We could, if we wanted, follow farther, follow down the mountain rock clack and leaf shatter, his trail of drip water and piss all the way to the river, where at his shadow salmon flash and scatter, and eagles dream him drowned and on a gravel bar racked, which is how eagles dream all of us. Child, there is no place we couldn't find him. Even if he were the last, we could 1 hour or day or year, it's all the same, take him in our arms, the almost unbearable softness of the ear. And I'm going to close with a poem I want to give my children co-writing credits on because it was sort of built of just following them around and listening to them play. And that word pretend has such power, such magic for kids, and it shifts the game one way and then it shifts it another. And so they get, my son and my daughter, they get co-writing credits on this one. It's called "The World in Which You Live Just as It Is." Pretend we're brown horses with white like this on our noses. Pretend the wind catches only just our tails behind us. Pretend we're sister and brother and we love one another. And for lunch there's grass and crackers, and in the field all the flowers, red, yellow, and there are blue ones too, but don't eat those. They're poison. Pretend we smell wolves. Pretend we are wolves. And when we howl, all the horses run except the littlest one. So we lick her on her white nose, and we are all friends on a mountain chewing flowers. But then I die. And like this, with leaves and sticks, you bury me, and you are so, so sad. And so am I. And here come the horses with their big hooves to pound the dirt down. I have a house now underground. Do you miss me? Down here, I get so hungry. Pretend, bring me one more mouthful of flowers. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. We do have a couple questions for everyone, so if you all could turn your cameras on, that would be great. Hello. Alrighty. Where should we go? One of our questions is, to any or all, how has this last year surprised you in your creativity or in your expression?
I'll take that simply because I heard Carolyn Forche answer the very same question yesterday, and I'll just not to paraphrase her, but to paraphrase her. I wasn't as prolific as I thought I would be. I think you think that, oh, I'm in isolation, or I'm socially distancing and I'm working from home, I have all this luxury of time, but there's this anxiety that came along with the past year that I think really butts heads with creative making and creative expression. So I think that was the main surprise. Yep, that's it.
May I answer as well?
Yeah, of course.
It was interesting too. I agree that surprise of not, thinking we have all this time to create, but that sort of low lying, the world is so different in the back of the heart and mind. And it was interesting. In writing my book, which was published before all this happened, it took a friend of mine to point out that I'd sort of foreshadowed what I ended up doing this year in a way, because pretty much in the time from when COVID was announced and the world shut down to now, I ended up getting engaged, married, and building a house. And so I ended up kind of doing some of the things that I'd written about in terms of building things that are both visible and invisible. And just today, shoveling gravel and thinking of St. Teresa and this architect. And so learning that creativity process, even though I've written far less than I've ever written this year, I'm realizing the beauty of poetry in just all of the everyday, like it's transcended the page in a way that I'm looking forward to revisiting when I do revisit the page, which might be a while because there's still a mountain of gravel out there. But it's been fun and hard and good all at once. So good question.
I'm sure that it was an interesting and productive and creative year for many people who don't have children. And for the rest of us, it was not.
Yes, Ed, yes. One thing I will add though is my children are writing a lot of poems now. And they write poems out of frustration often. They write poems out of what they are wishing for, and it's both delightful but also sometimes a little, I don't know, you wonder the impetus for them. They write them as sort of like a screeds or pronouncements of their dissatisfaction with the current things. But some of them are also quite good. So.
I can move on to a different question. Unless Floyd, do you want to add anything? Okay, our another question is, I'm loving each and every one of the readings. In response to what Joe just said, I'm curious how many of you are sharing this experience. I think that was to Joe's comment about being in isolation or not being able to read and not reading and being in a writing community. So I guess this person is asking, can anyone relate to that?
I'll just jump in and say I'm teaching a poetry workshop with my undergraduates, 9 a.m. Monday and Wednesday, and it's like been the highlight of my week for the last 3 months. We're all masked up and the windows are open and they have to bring all their blankets to class because it's been cold. But just even that semblance, and it looks very different from the community I'm used to, but even just that little bit of community has mattered a lot to me.
Just to kind of clarify, I guess any other way that you all are experiencing community right now?
I mean, not much. A lot of the ways that we set out to try to maintain some sort of community at the beginning of it all fell apart because they were still based on some needing to be around each other, and then there's so much to take care of it. But then some other things emerged, and I ended up being part of 2 book groups, one discussing poems and one discussing novels, people all over the country who were not close friends by and large. And it has been easier to have a social life through Zoom and email about shared interests than it has been to maintain lifelong friendships using the same materials, which I don't understand, but I'm grateful for it.
Then we have one last question. It's kind of like a 3-part or 4-part question. So let's just try it. So many of you draw from personal memory in your poems. What are you doing with memories when you bring them into poetry? Is it enough to evoke memory, or is the poem trying to shape it? To bring it to life, or to bring it to light an epiphany or wholeness to the fragments of memory? So that's kind of 1 or 2 parts. And then the last part is what makes personal memories important to the collective identity?
I'll jump in if that's all right. I look at memory quite a bit in my poems. I look at specifically memory and trauma, and how trauma can shape subjective memory and individual memory. But to answer the question, I think poems not only seek to draw out the memory, but they also seek to shape them and give them new expression in the poem. So I would say the answer is yes to both. It's a little bit of both. So it's calling on that memory and then just giving it like a vehicle. And I think memories are important. I think it was the philosopher Foucault who said that all humans have a story, and that history is it's very selective, but all of us have fragments of the overarching narrative of the human story to share. So I think relying on memory and sharing memory, it just enriches our sense of, being alive together.
I have, over the course of the last 40 some years, dealt with illnesses that have in part shattered my memories. Neurological damage, had had essentially torn my sense of wholeness into bits as memory became fragmentary and elusive and untrustworthy. And working with what fragments remain has, for me, been a way of discovering what I know and who I am. And in doing that, I hope it's also let readers have a similar experience, not only by taking a look at the memories I might present on the page, but dealing themselves with fragments and shards and bits of memory, and trying to follow where they lead and stitch themselves together.
I'll jump back into teaching to answer, but very often I'll have students come into my office and we'll be sort of talking about a poem, but they'll eventually start to tell me about something that happened to them, something that mattered to them, and it's particular, and it's something that's never happened to me, and I just like, oh my goodness, that is both, sometimes I'm sorry, sometimes I'm like, oh wow, sometimes all these reactions, but I often say, have you written that poem yet? You need to write that poem, because I want to read that poem, because that poem's going to matter to me. It's going to expand my own understanding of the world, of what it means to be alive right now. But I also think it's, the other thing is, I think it'll be helpful for you too. Write that poem, shape that memory, shape that experience, make it your own in a way that maybe it is your own now, but it can be more so. And so that's absolutely my own experience with memory too, that it allows me to shape, it allows me to connect. In some ways it's all we have. Of course, it's also welded together with imagination, but it's the building blocks of what we do.
I don't think we have any other questions, but I just want to thank you all so much for sharing your work tonight. It was so great to see you all kind of together in one space. Susan, did you want to say anything?
Oh, just thank you all for being here. Thanks to the audience, and thanks to the poets. And it's, like Jessica said, it's just really great to, if we can't be in person, it's great to be in a Zoom webinar with you, all of you. And it's just such a great range of work here, and such amazing poets. So Oregon is very rich in poets. Thank you.
Thank you all. There's some comments in the chat.
We can probably stop the recording. Is that